The air in Rosewood Cemetery hung thick with the scent of freshly turned earth and lilies, until Marcus Wellington's voice shattered the silence like thunder. "Stop this funeral. My daughter is breathing." 12 pairs of eyes snapped toward the billionaire as he strode across the manicured lawn, his Armani shoes leaving imprints in the damp grass. The June sun beat down mercilessly on the gathered mourners, their black clothing absorbing the heat like their shocked faces absorbed his impossible words. Marcus Wellington didn't run. Billionaires didn't run. But his 6'3" frame moved with the precision of a man who had built a tech empire from nothing, who had learned that hesitation cost fortunes, and today it could cost him everything that mattered: his daughter, his Rebecca. The mahogany casket gleamed in the afternoon light, positioned above the dark rectangular wound in the earth that was meant to swallow her forever. Inside that polished wooden box, draped in cream satin that made her skin look like porcelain, lay 34-year-old Rebecca Ashford, CEO of Ashford Digital Solutions, his stepdaughter for the past 18 years, the woman the medical examiner had pronounced dead 72 hours ago. "Mr. Wellington, please." Reverend Matthews stepped forward, his weathered hands extended in a gesture meant to calm. "I understand your grief, but look at her chest." Marcus's voice cut through the platitudes like surgical steel. He pointed at the casket with a hand that trembled, not from doubt, but from the adrenaline of a man who had just raced from his downtown Manhattan office after receiving a call that changed everything. "Look at her chest." The crowd shifted. Whispered conversations died mid-word. Jonathan Ashford, Rebecca's 42-year-old biological father, emerged from the cluster of mourners. His face had been carved from grief and expensive scotch over the past 3 days, eyes red-rimmed, jaw stubbled. He'd buried his first wife to cancer. Now his only daughter lay in a casket, and this man, this black billionaire who had married his ex-wife and given Rebecca opportunities Jonathan's struggling accounting firm never could, was making a scene at her funeral. "Marcus." Jonathan's voice cracked. "She's gone. The doctors confirmed. The doctors were wrong." Marcus moved to the casket, his fingers gripping the polished edge. His wedding ring, white gold, 18 years old, inscribed with vows to Rebecca's mother Eleanor, caught the light. "I got a call from Dr. Sarah Chen at Columbia Presbyterian 40 minutes ago. The toxicology report came back." The crowd pressed closer. Among them, Rebecca's executive team from Ashford Digital, their faces masks of professional sympathy hiding calculations about company succession. Rachel Morrison, the chief operating officer, stood with her arms crossed, her sharp features unreadable. David Park, chief technology officer, kept glancing at his phone. Victoria Hastings, the company's lead investor and board member, watched Marcus with eyes like a hawk tracking prey. "What toxicology report?" Victoria's voice was smooth as silk, dangerous as a blade. "Rebecca had a brain aneurysm. The autopsy was clear." Marcus's jaw tightened. This woman, 63 years old, worth $300 million, dressed in Chanel black with pearls that cost more than most people's homes, had pushed hard for this funeral to happen quickly. Too quickly, he'd thought at the time. Now he knew why. The autopsy found an aneurysm because they were told to find an aneurysm. Marcus pulled out his phone, hands steadier now that he was in combat mode. The same mode that had won him contracts with Fortune 500 companies, that had taken Wellington Tech from a garage startup to a billion-dollar valuation. Dr. Chen ran additional tests on the tissue samples. She found traces of tetrodotoxin. The word landed like a bomb. "That's..." Jonathan stepped forward, his face pale. "That's pufferfish poison. That's a neurotoxin that paralyzes the entire body, slows the heart rate to nearly undetectable levels, and mimics death so perfectly that in Haiti, it's been used to create zombies for voodoo rituals." Marcus's voice grew louder, projecting to every corner of the gathered crowd. "It's also nearly impossible to detect in a standard autopsy, unless you're specifically looking for it. Symptoms include total paralysis while remaining fully conscious." Eleanor Wellington gasped from her wheelchair near the grave's edge. At 61, Rebecca's mother had been battling multiple sclerosis for a decade, her body betraying her even as her mind remained sharp. Her trembling hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "You're saying—" Eleanor's whisper somehow carried across the grass. "You're saying my baby has been conscious? Aware? For 3 days? I'm saying she's been buried alive by incompetent doctors and whoever poisoned her." Marcus leaned over the casket, his reflection visible in the polished wood. "And I can prove it." He pressed 2 fingers against Rebecca's neck just below her jawline, where the carotid artery should pulse with life. The crowd held its collective breath. Someone's phone camera was recording. Marcus could see the red light in his peripheral vision, but he didn't care. Let them film. Let the world watch. There. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the silence, everyone heard. Her pulse. Faint, maybe 4 beats per minute, but it's there. Reverend Matthews moved closer, his professional skepticism warring with desperate hope. He'd known Rebecca since she was 16, had counseled her through her parents' divorce, had watched her build an empire before she turned 30. "Let me check." The Reverend's fingers joined Marcus's at Rebecca's throat. Seconds ticked by. A bird called from the oak tree overhead. Someone in the crowd sobbed. "Dear God." Reverend Matthews staggered back. "He's right. There's a pulse." The crowd erupted. Rachel Morrison pulled out her phone, already dialing 911. David Park pushed forward, his tech genius mind trying to process the impossible. Victoria Hastings's face went from composed to calculating in the span of a heartbeat, her eyes darting between Rebecca and the crowd like she was running probability scenarios. "Everyone back up!" Marcus's command voice, the one that had silenced boardrooms full of hostile investors, cut through the chaos. "She needs air, she needs space, and someone call Columbia Presbyterian. Tell them, doctor." Chen was right, and we need a medical team here now. Jonathan Ashford stood frozen, staring at his daughter's face. Rebecca's auburn hair spilled across the white satin pillow, perfectly arranged by the funeral home's cosmetologists. Her makeup was flawless. Too flawless. They'd painted life onto death, not knowing that life was still fighting underneath. "Becca." Jonathan's voice broke as he fell to his knees beside the casket. "Baby girl, if you can hear me." Rebecca's eyelids flickered. It was barely perceptible, a tiny spasm, a fraction of a millimeter of movement. But Marcus saw it. Eleanor saw it. And Jonathan, his face inches from his daughter's, definitely saw it. "She moved!" Jonathan grabbed her hand, the carefully positioned hand that had been folded across her chest in eternal rest. "Her eyelid moved. Rebecca!" Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. 18 years ago, he'd married Eleanor and inherited a broken 16-year-old girl who'd just watched her parents destroy each other in a bitter divorce. He'd given Rebecca his name, his resources, his connections. But more than that, he'd given her something her biological father's pride could never provide: unconditional support. He'd funded her education at Wharton. He'd been her first investor when she pitched her crazy idea for a digital marketing platform. He'd walked her down the aisle when she married Thomas Ashford, no relation to Jonathan 3 years ago. And he'd been there when Thomas died in a car accident 18 months later, holding Rebecca as she sobbed into his shoulder, promising her that grief wouldn't destroy her the way it had destroyed her father. He wasn't losing her now, not to poison, not to incompetence, not to whoever had done this. "Marcus." Eleanor's wheelchair rolled closer, propelled by her nurse Linda. "Is my baby going to be okay?" Before he could answer, Victoria Hastings spoke up, her voice cutting through the emotional chaos with cold pragmatism. "We need to consider the legal implications here. If Rebecca was poisoned, this is a crime scene. We can't contaminate." "I don't give a damn about your legal implications," Marcus rounded on her. "My daughter is fighting for her life in a casket that was about to be lowered 6 feet underground." Your legal concerns can wait until she's breathing normally. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Rachel Morrison had gotten through to emergency services. The ambulance would be here in minutes. But minutes might be too long. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him later, or save Rebecca's life. He scooped his hands under her body, the body that had been embalmed, prepared, dressed for eternal viewing, and lifted her from the casket. She was lighter than he remembered, fragile. The black dress she wore, her favorite Valentino, the one she'd worn to close the merger deal with Hastings Investments, rustled as he cradled her against his chest. "What are you doing?" Victoria's shriek pierced the air. "You can't move her. The paramedics are 2 minutes away and she might not have 2 minutes." Marcus began walking toward the cemetery entrance where the ambulance sirens grew deafening. Her body has been fighting this poison for 72 hours with no medical intervention. Every second counts. Rebecca's head lolled against his shoulder. He could feel it now. The faint, impossibly slow rhythm of her heart against his chest. 4 beats per minute. Maybe 5. A human heart should beat 60 to 100 times per minute. Hers was barely sustaining life. The crowd parted as Marcus strode through them, this 6'3" black billionaire in a $3,000 suit, carrying a white woman in a funeral dress like she weighed nothing. Behind him, Eleanor's wheelchair followed, Linda pushing at nearly a run. Jonathan stumbled after them, his face a mask of shock and desperate hope. The ambulance screeched into the cemetery's circular drive, just as Marcus emerged from between the oak trees. 2 paramedics, a young Latino man and a middle-aged black woman, jumped out already reaching for their equipment. "Female 34, tetrodotoxin poisoning," Marcus barked before they could ask questions. "Pulse approximately 4 BPM. She's been in a coma-like state for 72 hours. Dr. Sarah Chen at Columbia Presbyterian has the full toxicology report." The female paramedic's eyes widened in recognition. Whether of Marcus or the situation, he wasn't sure. But she moved with trained efficiency. "Get her on the gurney. Sir, I need you to set her down gently." Marcus lowered Rebecca onto the wheeled stretcher, his hands reluctant to let go. The paramedics descended on her with practiced speed. Blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, stethoscope. The fluorescent lights of Columbia Presbyterian's emergency room burned like accusation as Marcus paced the sterile corridor, his expensive shoes squeaking against linoleum that had witnessed 1,000 crises. 3 hours. Rebecca had been behind those double doors for 3 hours while doctors fought to flush the poison from her system, to wake her from a paralysis so complete she'd been declared dead by professionals who should have known better. Marcus's fists clenched and unclenched in rhythm with his steps. 12 paces to the water fountain, turn. 12 paces back to the waiting room entrance. Turn. Repeat. His mind couldn't settle, couldn't rest, kept replaying the moment he'd felt her heartbeat against his fingers, that fragile thread of life that everyone else had given up for lost. "Marcus, you need to sit down." Eleanor's voice carried the gentle firmness of a woman who'd spent 18 years married to a man who didn't know how to stop moving. Her wheelchair sat positioned near the windows overlooking East 68th Street, where the Tuesday evening traffic crawled through Manhattan's arteries like sluggish blood. Linda stood behind her, ever present, ever patient. "I can't." Marcus's voice was raw. He hadn't realized he'd been grinding his teeth until his jaw started aching. "Every minute she's in there, whoever did this is getting further away. Every minute we waste, they're covering their tracks. The police are already investigating." Jonathan sat slumped in one of those impossibly uncomfortable waiting room chairs, his tie loosened, his face aged a decade since this morning. Detective Morrison, no relation to Rachel, is at Rebecca's apartment right now, going through everything. Marcus stopped pacing. They won't find anything there. Whoever poisoned her is too smart for that. Tetrodotoxin isn't something you pick up at the corner pharmacy. It requires connections, knowledge, planning. His mind shifted into the analytical mode that had built his empire, breaking down problems into solvable components, identifying variables, calculating probabilities. The poison was administered at least 72 hours before she collapsed. That means Friday morning or Thursday night. Where was she? Eleanor pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, navigating to Rebecca's calendar. They'd synced their schedules years ago, a practical necessity when coordinating family dinners around three demanding careers. Thursday night she had dinner with the executive team. Friday morning she had breakfast with Victoria Hastings. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. Victoria. Marcus's voice went deadly quiet. Victoria, who pushed for the funeral to happen today instead of waiting for the full autopsy. Victoria, whose investment firm stands to gain controlling interest in Ashford Digital if Rebecca dies without heirs. He pulled out his own phone, fingers flying across the screen. Victoria, who opposed Rebecca's decision to pivot the company toward ethical AI development because it would cut into profit margins. You think Victoria poisoned my daughter? Jonathan stood up, his accountant's mind already running calculations. That's insane. She'd never risk a murder charge for $200 million? Marcus's laugh held no humor. Jonathan, you've spent your career looking at numbers. Look at these numbers. Rebecca's company is valued at $600 million. Victoria owns 30% through Hastings Investments. But Rebecca's controlling shares, 51%, revert to the company upon her death with no direct heirs. That triggers a clause in the investment agreement that allows Victoria to purchase those shares at 20% below market value. Eleanor gasped. That's $120 million in instant profit, plus majority control of a company positioned to dominate the ethical AI market. Marcus resumed pacing, but now with purpose. And if Rebecca was developing technology that Victoria opposed, technology that might undermine Hastings Investments' other holdings in traditional AI companies? The double doors burst open. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged, still in surgical scrubs, her face exhausted but triumphant. At 39, she'd made her reputation in toxicology by identifying poisoning cases that other doctors missed. When Marcus had called her 3 weeks ago about consulting on a case of suspected industrial espionage, never imagining it would become personal, she'd impressed him with her methodical brilliance. Now she'd saved his daughter's life. She's awake. Dr. Chen's words triggered an explosion of movement. Eleanor's wheelchair rolled forward. Jonathan stumbled to his feet. Marcus covered the distance to the doctor in 3 long strides. How awake? Marcus's question was sharp, specific. Can she speak? Does she remember what happened? Partial paralysis is resolving faster than expected. Dr. Chen's professional mask cracked slightly, revealing genuine amazement underneath. Marcus, she should be dead. The concentration of tetrodotoxin in her system. If she'd been exposed for another 12 hours, the damage to her organs would have been irreversible. You saved her life by stopping that funeral. Can we see her? Eleanor's voice cracked on the last word, tears streaming down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. One at a time. She's still very weak. Her vocal cords are recovering, so her speech is limited. Dr. Chen looked directly at Marcus. She's been asking for you. Something in Marcus's chest, the tight knot of fear that had been choking him since he'd gotten the call from Dr. Chen at his office, finally loosened. Take me to her. The ICU room was a cocoon of beeping monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Rebecca lay propped at a 45-degree angle, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that tracked every heartbeat, every breath. Her auburn hair had been pulled back from her face, revealing the pallor of her skin. But her eyes, those sharp green eyes that had convinced boardrooms full of skeptical investors to bet millions on her vision, were open, and they were focused on him. Marcus. The word came out as barely a whisper, her vocal cords still recovering from 72 hours of paralysis. But the recognition in her eyes, the intelligence, the fierce determination he'd watched her cultivate from age 16 to 34, it was all there. He crossed to her bedside, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. Her fingers were cold, but they moved, squeezing his hand with strength that was returning millimeter by millimeter. Hey, kiddo, you gave us quite a scare. I heard everything. Each word was an effort, her breath shallow. At the funeral, your voice, Dad crying, Mom's wheelchair. Marcus felt his throat tighten. You were conscious? The whole time? A single tear rolled down Rebecca's cheek. 3 days. Couldn't move. Couldn't scream. The morgue. The embalming. Her breathing became ragged, monitors beeping faster. They cut me open. I felt everything. Jesus Christ. Marcus had seen combat in his youth, 2 tours in Iraq before using his GI Bill to get his engineering degree. He'd watched friends die, had killed enemies himself. But the thought of Rebecca conscious and paralyzed while medical examiners performed an autopsy on her living body made his stomach revolt. Who did this to you? He kept his voice gentle despite the rage building behind his ribs like a pressure cooker. Do you remember? Was it at the breakfast with Victoria? Rebecca's eyes widened fractionally, the only fear response her recovering body could manage. Not Victoria. The coffee. Victoria's assistant brought it. James. He insisted. Special blend from Jakarta. Marcus's free hand was already pulling out his phone. What's James's last name? Morrison. The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's fingers. Morrison, as in Rachel's younger brother. Rebecca's whisper carried the weight of betrayal. He started 2 months ago. Victoria hired him as favor to Rachel. The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind with the precision of a well-designed algorithm. Rachel Morrison, chief operating officer, who'd been Rebecca's friend since college. Rachel, who'd been passed over when Rebecca chose to remain CEO instead of promoting her. Rachel, whose brother just happened to get hired by the one person with financial motive to see Rebecca dead. Rachel knew about the ethical AI pivot. Marcus was already texting Detective Morrison, the police detective, not the poisoner or his sister. She opposed it, said it would tank stock price. We fought the night before the breakfast. Rebecca's eyes closed briefly, exhaustion winning over determination. I told her, if she couldn't support company direction, she should resign. So she killed you instead. Marcus's voice went flat, emotionless, the voice that terrified competitors because it meant he'd moved beyond anger into calculation. Or tried to. Not just her. Rebecca's eyes opened again, fixing on Marcus with sudden intensity. At the funeral, I heard Victoria. She said, contaminate the crime scene. She knew. They're working together. Marcus's mind raced through implications. A conspiracy between the COO and the primary investor. Rachel handling the internal motive, preventing the ethical AI pivot, possibly positioning herself to take over the company. Victoria handling the financial side, buying up shares at discount, maintaining profit margins with traditional AI development, and both of them willing to murder Rebecca to make it happen. I'm going to destroy them. Marcus's promise was quiet. Absolute. Both of them. By the time I'm done, they'll wish you'd actually died, because what's coming for them is worse than any court system could deliver. Marcus. Rebecca's weak grip on his hand tightened fractionally. Not revenge. Justice. Do it. Right. Make them pay legally. He looked at his stepdaughter, this woman he'd raised, mentored, fought for, and saw the ethical compass that had driven her to pivot a profitable company toward doing the right thing, even when it cost her money. Even when it nearly cost her life. Justice, he agreed. But justice doesn't mean I have to be nice about it. A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Chen poked her head in. Sorry, but there's a Detective Morrison here demanding to speak with Rebecca, and... She hesitated. Rachel Morrison and Victoria Hastings are in the waiting room. They heard Rebecca survived and want to see her. Marcus's smile was predatory. Perfect. Tell the detective I'll be right out with information about the poisoning. Tell Rachel and Victoria that Rebecca is too weak for visitors. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to Rebecca's forehead. But let them know she's expected to make a full recovery and will be giving her statement to police tomorrow. What are you doing? Rebecca's whisper carried confusion. I'm giving them rope to hang themselves. Marcus straightened, his mind already 3 steps ahead. If they think you're going to talk to police tomorrow, they'll panic tonight. They'll contact each other, maybe try to coordinate their stories or destroy evidence, and Detective Morrison will be watching every move they make. He headed for the door, then paused. Rebecca, I'm proud of you. For building something worth dying for. Now we're going to make sure you live long enough to see it succeed. In the corridor, Eleanor and Jonathan waited with identical expressions of desperate hope. Marcus gave them both a reassuring nod. She's going to be fine. Weak, but her mind is sharp as ever. Dr. Chen says full recovery expected in 3 to 4 weeks. Eleanor sobbed with relief. Jonathan sagged against the wall, the weight of 3 days' grief finally lifting. Marcus walked past them toward the waiting room, toward the confrontation with the women who'd tried to murder his daughter. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrison. Warrant approved for Rachel Morrison's electronics. James Morrison in custody. Victoria Hastings' assistant just tried to flee JFK Airport with one-way ticket to Singapore. Intercepted. Everything was falling into place. The waiting room fell silent when Marcus entered. Rachel Morrison sat rigid in her chair, her perfectly composed COO mask starting to crack at the edges. Victoria Hastings stood by the windows, her expensive perfume not quite masking the scent of fear. Detective James Morrison, no relation, a fact Marcus found darkly humorous, was a compact, serious man in his 50s who'd built his reputation on financial crimes. He extended his hand to Marcus. Mr. Wellington, I understand you have information about the poisoning. I do. Marcus's voice carried through the room, making sure both women heard every word. Rebecca has identified her poisoner. She was conscious and aware for the entire 72 hours, including during her time at the funeral home. She heard everything. She remembers everything. Rachel's face went white. Victoria's hand trembled as she gripped her Hermes bag. She'll be giving her full statement tomorrow morning when her doctors clear her to speak at length. Marcus smiled, sharp as broken glass. I'm sure you'll want to be thorough in your investigation, Detective. This wasn't just attempted murder. This was conspiracy, fraud, corporate espionage. The people responsible should spend the rest of their lives in prison. He turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something. Oh, and Detective, you might want to check Victoria Hastings' travel plans. I hear Singapore doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. Victoria's gasp was all the confirmation Marcus needed. Midnight in Manhattan painted the city in shades of amber streetlight and shadow, while inside a parked surveillance van 2 blocks from Rachel Morrison's Upper West Side apartment, Detective James Morrison watched 3 screens with the patience of a predator. Marcus Wellington sat beside him, ignoring the cramped space and stale coffee smell, his eyes fixed on the monitor showing Rachel's living room. They'd been here for 6 hours, waiting, watching, knowing that guilty people always made mistakes when they thought time was running out. She's been on her phone 17 times in the past hour. Detective Morrison's voice was matter of fact, years of surveillance work stripping away any excitement. Deleting messages, clearing browser history, classic signs of panic. Good. Marcus's single word carried satisfaction. On the screen, Rachel paced her expensive apartment. All minimalist furniture and abstract art, the kind of place designed to impress rather than comfort. She'd changed from her funeral blacks into yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her carefully maintained COO appearance crumbling as fast as her alibi. The detective's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then showed it to Marcus. Victoria Hastings just withdrew $500,000 in cash from 3 different banks. Her lawyer is already negotiating surrender terms. She's going to flip on Rachel. Marcus leaned back, the surveillance van's metal wall cold against his shoulders. Victoria's 63 years old. She won't risk dying in prison. She'll trade Rachel for a lighter sentence. That's what I'm counting on. Detective Morrison adjusted one of the cameras. My team just executed the warrant on James Morrison's apartment. Still no relation, by the way, which is going to make the paperwork a nightmare. We found receipts for tetrodotoxin purchased on the dark web, delivered to a P.O. box registered under a shell company. The shell company traces back to an account funded by transfers from Rachel Morrison's personal checking. Marcus felt something dark and satisfied settle in his chest. She paid her own brother to kill Rebecca. Looks that way. Though the transfers were disguised as consulting fees for a fake marketing company, the detective pulled up financial records on another screen. Rachel's smart. She created layers of separation, but she made one critical mistake. She underestimated Rebecca. Marcus's voice carried pride mixed with fury. Rebecca built her company on predictive analytics and pattern recognition. She would have spotted the financial irregularities eventually, even if she hadn't been poisoned. Rachel had to act fast, which meant cutting corners. The monitor showing Rachel's apartment flickered as she made another phone call. This time, the detective's equipment caught it. A direct line to Victoria Hastings, unencrypted. Desperate. Detective Morrison hit a button and Rachel's voice filled the van's cramped space through speakers. "Don't care what your lawyer says, Victoria. She's alive. She heard everything at the funeral. Marcus said she remembers everything." Rachel's voice cracked with panic. "The breakfast, the coffee, James bringing it in. Calm down." Victoria's usual silk-smooth tone had frayed edges. "We had an agreement. Nothing connects us directly. Your brother acted alone as far as any court can prove. You maintain that you knew nothing about his actions. I hired him on your recommendation. That connects us." Rachel's shriek was pure terror. "And what about the investment clause? They'll figure out your motive. They'll prove nothing if you stop talking on unsecured lines." Victoria's snap cut through Rachel's hysteria. "I'm surrendering to authorities in the morning with my legal team. I'm going to claim that I opposed Rebecca's business decisions through legal channels only, and that any actions James Morrison took were independent criminal acts that I had no knowledge of." "You're throwing me under the bus." Rachel's laugh held no humor. "After everything. After I gave you inside information for 2 years, after I helped you manipulate board votes, after I killed for you, you killed for yourself." Victoria's voice went cold as ice. "You wanted to be CEO. You wanted Rebecca's position, her success, her father's approval. I simply provided an opportunity. What you chose to do with it was your decision." The line went dead. Marcus and Detective Morrison exchanged glances. "Did we get all that?" Marcus asked. "Every word. Recorded, time-stamped with voice authentication." The detective was already typing notes. "That's conspiracy to commit murder, admission of corporate espionage, and Victoria just established that Rachel had direct motive beyond the financial. A jury will eat this up." On screen, Rachel collapsed onto her designer couch, head in her hands, shoulders shaking. Marcus felt no pity. This woman had been Rebecca's friend since their sophomore year at Wharton. They'd built Ashford Digital together from a dorm room idea into a $600 million company. Rebecca had trusted her with everything, and Rachel had repaid that trust with poison. Why? Marcus spoke more to himself than the detective. She was already wealthy, already successful. Rebecca would have given her anything she asked for. Because giving isn't the same as earning. Detective Morrison had seen this pattern before. Rachel spent 12 years in Rebecca's shadow. Rebecca was the visionary, the CEO, the one who got profiled in Forbes and Fortune. Rachel was always, and her talented COO in the articles. That kind of resentment builds like cancer. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Chen. "Rebecca asking for you, says she needs to tell you something about the company." He stood, hunching in the van's low ceiling. "I need to get back to the hospital." "Go." Detective Morrison didn't look away from his monitors. "We've got enough to arrest Rachel in the morning. I'll send an officer to guard Rebecca's room. Protocol now that we have confirmation of conspiracy." "Make it 2 officers." Marcus pulled on his jacket. "And detective? When you arrest Rachel, I want to be there. Personal enough for you? The detective's question held no judgment. She tried to bury my daughter alive. Marcus's voice could have frozen nitrogen. Yeah, it's personal. The ICU at 1 a.m. existed in a strange twilight. Too quiet to be fully alive, too full of beeping monitors to be peaceful. Marcus found Rebecca awake, propped higher now, some color returning to her cheeks. Eleanor sat in the visitor's chair, dozing with her head tilted back at an angle that would give her neck pain later. Jonathan had gone home hours ago, exhausted from grief and relief in equal measure. Hey. Rebecca's voice was stronger, the whisper evolving into something closer to normal speech. Mom said you were watching Rachel. Did she confess? Marcus settled into the chair on the other side of Rebecca's bed, careful not to wake Eleanor. On a recorded line to Victoria, admitting to conspiracy, murder, and 2 years of corporate espionage, he allowed himself a small smile. Your COO just ensured she'll never run another company, except maybe in a prison work program. I should feel something. Rebecca stared at the ceiling, IV drip feeding medication into her recovering system. Betrayal, anger, something. But I'm just empty. She was my friend, Marcus, my best friend. We built everything together. I know, kiddo. Marcus took her hand, the same way he'd held it when she was 16 and crying over her parents' divorce. The same way he'd held it when she'd graduated from Wharton summa cum laude. The same way he'd held it when she'd buried her husband. Betrayal from someone you love always hurts the most. Did you ever... Rebecca paused, gathering strength. When you married Mom, did Jonathan ever try to sabotage things? Try to get me to hate you? Marcus remembered those early years, the subtle comments Jonathan would make, the way he'd forget to pick Rebecca up for visitation, forcing Marcus to drive across town. The passive-aggressive remarks about Marcus being not her real father, even though he did more parenting in a week than Jonathan managed in a month. Yes, Marcus answered honestly. Your biological father saw me as a threat. A black man with more money and success than he'd ever have raising his daughter, giving her opportunities he couldn't provide. It ate at him. But you never poisoned him. Rebecca's attempt at dark humor made Marcus's lips twitch despite the gravity. I never needed to. I had something Jonathan could never compete with. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I had your trust, your love. That's not something you can buy or steal or manufacture. You give it freely, or not at all. Tears slipped down Rebecca's cheeks, the first real emotion she'd shown since waking. I gave Rachel my trust. I gave her everything. Partnership, friendship, a place in my company. And she poisoned my coffee. Because she wanted what you built without doing the work to earn it. Marcus pulled tissues from the bedside table, dabbing at her tears with the same careful touch he'd used when she was a teenager with her first heartbreak. Rachel looked at your success and only saw what she didn't have. She never appreciated what she did have. A brilliant partner who valued her, a position most people would kill for. He paused. Poor choice of words. Rebecca's laugh was wet, broken, but genuine. God, Marcus, only you could make me laugh while talking about my attempted murder. Gallows humor, learned it in Iraq. He settled back in his chair. Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you. About the company. Her eyes sharpened despite the exhaustion. What happened? Nothing yet. But with you incapacitated and Rachel about to be arrested, the board is going to panic. Victoria owns 30%. Other investors hold another 19%. That leaves 51% in my control. Rebecca's mind, even poisoned and paralyzed for 3 days, still calculated faster than most people could think. But I can't run the company from a hospital bed, and without a COO. I'm proposing we install an interim CEO until you're recovered. Marcus watched her face carefully. Someone the board trusts. Someone with experience running a tech company. Someone who has your best interests at heart because they raised you. Rebecca stared at him. You want to run Ashford Digital? Temporarily. 3 months, maybe 4, until you're back on your feet. Marcus leaned forward. Rebecca, your ethical AI pivot is exactly what the industry needs. But it's going to face opposition from every corner. Investors who want quick profits, competitors who feel threatened, politicians who don't understand the technology. You need someone who can fight those battles while you heal. You'd do that? Rebecca's voice cracked. Put your own company on hold to save mine. Wellington Tech practically runs itself at this point, and yes, I'd do that. Marcus's smile was gentle. You're my daughter, not by blood, but by choice. By 18 years of late-night homework help and teaching you to drive and walking you down the aisle. By every moment I chose to be your father when your biological father chose his pride instead. So yes, Rebecca. I'd run your company, fight your battles, and burn down anyone who tries to hurt you again. Eleanor stirred in her chair, her eyes opening to catch the last of Marcus's declaration. She smiled, tears glistening. That's why I married you. Not for your money or your success, because you love fiercely and protect what's yours. Our daughter almost died because people valued profit over her life. Marcus stood, restless energy filling him again. That changes today. The board meets tomorrow at noon, emergency session to address the crisis. I'm going to propose myself as interim CEO and announce that Ashford Digital is accelerating the ethical AI pivot, not abandoning it. Anyone who opposes can sell their shares or shut up. Victoria will fight you. Rebecca's warning was weak but serious. Victoria will be in police custody by noon negotiating a plea deal. Marcus checked his watch. In 6 hours, Detective Morrison arrests Rachel. In 7 hours, Victoria surrenders. In 8 hours, I take control of your company and make sure their plan fails so completely that every would-be corporate murderer thinks twice. His phone buzzed. A text from Detective Morrison. Rachel just attempted to board a train to Boston. Intercepted at Penn Station. Making arrest now. Thought you'd want to know. Marcus showed the text to Rebecca. It's happening. Justice is happening. Rebecca closed her eyes, exhaustion finally winning. Promise me something, Marcus. When this is over, when I'm recovered and running my company again, promise me you'll still be my dad, not my interim CEO or my business advisor, just my dad. Marcus bent down, pressing a kiss to her forehead the way he had 1,000 times before. Kiddo, I've been your dad since the moment I married your mom. A title change at work doesn't change that. Nothing changes that. As Rebecca drifted into healing sleep, Eleanor wheeled closer to Marcus. You know the board will fight you. They'll question your authority, your motives. Let them. Marcus's smile was predatory again. I built Wellington Tech from nothing to $1 billion valuation. I can run Ashford Digital with one hand tied behind my back, and anyone who tries to stop me will learn why I don't lose. His phone buzzed again. This time, a photo from Detective Morrison. Rachel Morrison in handcuffs, being led into a police cruiser, her face a mask of despair and rage. The caption read, "One down. Victoria Hastings surrendering with her lawyers at 8 a.m. Case closed by lunch." Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter, at his wife watching him with love and pride, and felt the weight of 3 days of terror finally lift. Not closed, he murmured to himself. Just beginning. Because now comes the part where I make sure nothing like this ever happens again. 6 months later, the Manhattan skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows of Ashford Digital's 40th floor conference room, where Rebecca Ashford stood before her executive team, alive, healthy, and ready to reclaim her company. The November sun cast golden light across the polished mahogany table, where 8 new faces sat alongside 3 familiar ones. David Park, the CTO who'd stood silent at her funeral, now met her eyes with respect hard-earned through months of proving his loyalty. The rest of Rachel Morrison's old team had been systematically replaced, each departure handled with Marcus's characteristic precision, generous severance packages paired with ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Before we begin this quarterly review, I want to say something. Rebecca's voice carried the strength of someone who'd fought their way back from the grave. Literally. Her auburn hair, longer now, fell in waves past her shoulders. The black Valentino dress she'd been buried in had been donated to a domestic violence charity. Today she wore cobalt blue Armani, a color that screamed survival. The room fell silent. 7 months ago, someone I trusted, someone I considered family, decided I was worth more dead than alive. Rebecca's hands rested steady on the table, no tremor despite the weight of her words. Rachel Morrison and Victoria Hastings poisoned me with tetrodotoxin, declared me dead, and very nearly succeeded in burying me alive. They did this for money, for power, for control of the company we built together. She paused, letting the reality settle over the new executives who'd only heard rumors. They failed, not because I'm special or lucky, but because I had people who refused to give up on me. Rebecca's eyes found Marcus sitting at the far end of the table in the seat he'd occupied as interim CEO for the past 6 months. My father saw what others missed. He stopped my funeral. He saved my life. And then he saved this company. Marcus shifted, uncomfortable with praise as always, but Rebecca wasn't finished. Under Marcus Wellington's leadership, Ashford Digital didn't just survive. We thrived. Our ethical AI platform launched 3 months ahead of schedule. We secured partnerships with 12 Fortune 500 companies who want technology that prioritizes humanity over profit margins. Our stock price is up 43%. We're not just successful, we're changing the industry. The new Chief Operating Officer, Jennifer Chen, 46, a veteran of Google's AI ethics division, smiled with genuine warmth. You're also Time Magazine's Person of the Year, the woman who came back from the dead to revolutionize artificial intelligence. Rebecca laughed, the sound still capable of surprising her after months of vocal therapy. That was Marcus's PR strategy. Turn tragedy into triumph, use your story to advance your mission. Very Sun Tzu. Very effective, David Park added. The media coverage alone generated $200 million in free advertising. Every tech conference wants you as keynote speaker. MIT wants to name their new AI ethics center after you. They can name it after Marcus. Rebecca's declaration was firm. The Marcus Wellington Center for Ethical Technology. He's the one who fought for this vision while I was learning to walk again. The memory of those early weeks still haunted her nightmares. The physical therapy sessions where her body refused to obey commands, her brain screamed. The speech therapy where words came out garbled, useless. The psychological counseling to process the trauma of being conscious during her own autopsy. 3 months of intensive rehabilitation before she could walk unassisted. Another 2 before she could speak without slurring. And even now, 6 months later, her left hand sometimes trembled when she was tired. But she was here, alive, victorious. The board meeting is at 2 o'clock. Marcus's voice brought her back to the present. They're voting on the permanent CEO position. You ready? I've been ready since the moment I woke up in that ICU and saw your face. Rebecca smiled at the man who'd been more father to her than the one who'd given her DNA. But first, there's something I need to do. David, pull up the video feed from Rikers Island. The main screen flickered to life, showing a stark visitation room where Rachel Morrison sat across from a camera, looking a decade older than her 36 years. Prison orange replaced designer suits. Hollow eyes replaced the sharp calculation Rebecca remembered. The woman who'd been her best friend, her partner, her would-be murderer, stared at the camera with empty resignation. Hello, Rachel. Rebecca's voice was steady, betraying none of the complicated emotions churning beneath her professional surface. Rachel flinched. Rebecca, you look good, healthy. I am. No thanks to you. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. I need you to understand something. Not for closure. I don't need that from you. Not for forgiveness. You'll never have that. But for the record, so when you're sitting in your cell for the next 25 years, you remember this moment. Rachel's hands twisted together on the metal table. I never meant for it to go that far. Victoria said it would just make you sick, that you'd step down voluntarily. Don't. Rebecca's single word cut like a scalpel. Don't insult me with lies. You paid your brother $50,000 to poison me with a neurotoxin that paralyzes every muscle while keeping the victim fully conscious. You knew exactly what tetrodotoxin does. You researched it for 3 months before James bought it on the dark web. The prosecution has your browser history, Rachel. Your search terms were very specific. The room full of executives sat frozen, witnessing a confrontation 6 months in the making. You wanted me to suffer. Rebecca's voice remained calm, clinical. You wanted me to feel every moment of my death because you resented every moment of my success. 12 years of friendship, and underneath it all, you hated me. I didn't hate you. Rachel's voice cracked. I hated that everything came so easy for you. Rich stepfather, brilliant ideas, natural charisma. I worked just as hard, Rebecca. I was just as smart. But you were always the star, and I was always, and her COO. So you decided if you couldn't be the star, there wouldn't be one at all. Rebecca nodded slowly. The prosecution presented your therapy sessions as evidence. Your therapist's notes documented years of resentment, jealousy, what she called pathological envy. You were sick, Rachel, and instead of getting help, you got poison. I know. Rachel's whisper barely carried through the speakers. I know what I am. What I did. Victoria manipulated me, but I made the choice. I watched you drink that coffee and I said nothing. I went to your funeral and I cried fake tears while knowing you might still be conscious in that casket. I'm a monster. Yes. Rebecca's agreement held no satisfaction, only truth. You are. And you'll spend the next quarter century in prison thinking about the friendship you destroyed, the company you tried to ruin, and the life you threw away for nothing. Because we won, Rachel. Everything you tried to prevent, the ethical AI pivot, the industry change, the success, it's all happening. Without you. Despite you. Rachel's face crumpled, tears flowing freely now. I'm sorry. God, Rebecca, I'm so sorry. Your apology means nothing. Rebecca stood, signaling the end of the conversation. But your conviction means everything. Every tech executive who thinks about putting profit over ethics, who considers harming someone to get ahead, they'll remember your name. Rachel Morrison, the COO who murdered her CEO and got caught. You're going to be a cautionary tale. That's your legacy. She nodded to David, who cut the video feed. Rachel's sobbing face vanished, replaced by the Ashford digital logo. The conference room remained silent until Jennifer Chen spoke carefully. That was intense. That was necessary. Rebecca straightened her jacket. I needed her to know that her actions had consequences, that justice prevailed, that evil doesn't win just because it tries hard enough. She looked around the table at her new team. This company stands for something now. We're not just building AI. We're building AI that serves humanity instead of exploiting it. And everyone who works here needs to understand that our ethics aren't negotiable. Marcus checked his watch. We have 90 minutes before the board meeting. Rebecca, you should know. Jonathan asked to speak with you before the vote. Rebecca's relationship with her biological father had evolved considerably over the past 6 months. Jonathan Ashford had spent decades letting pride and resentment poison his relationship with his daughter. Watching her nearly die had shattered something in him, or maybe rebuilt it. He'd attended every one of her physical therapy sessions, had relearned how to be a father, instead of a competitor to Marcus's parenting. Send him in. Jonathan entered the conference room looking nervous, clutching a folder like a lifeline. At 42, he'd finally started addressing the alcoholism that had haunted him since his divorce. 6 months sober, regular AA meetings, therapy twice a week. The changes showed in clearer eyes, steadier hands, genuine presence. Rebecca, you look amazing. Jonathan's smile was tentative but real. Ready to take back your throne? More than ready. Rebecca gestured to a chair. What did you need to discuss? Jonathan opened the folder, hands only slightly trembling. I've been working with my accountant on something. When we thought you were dead, I realized I'd wasted years being jealous of Marcus instead of grateful that you had a father figure who actually showed up. He slid papers across the table. These are my shares in Ashford Digital. 5% that you gave me when you incorporated that I've held on to out of spite, more than investment strategy. Rebecca scanned the documents, her business mind immediately grasping the implications. You're transferring them to Marcus. I'm transferring them to the person who's been your real father for 18 years. Jonathan's voice steadied with conviction. Marcus saved your life. He saved your company. He deserves to be an official part of what you've built. And I deserve to stop pretending I have any right to ownership in something I contributed nothing to except DNA. Marcus started to protest, but Jonathan held up a hand. Let me finish. I've spent 6 months in therapy unpacking why I resented you, Marcus. You're everything I failed to be. Present, supportive, successful, black. That last part shouldn't matter, but I'd be lying if I said my racism didn't fuel my resentment. I'm not proud of it. I'm working on it, but I can't change the past. I can only try to do better going forward. The conference room had cleared at some point, giving them privacy for this family reckoning. Rebecca felt tears pricking her eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange, powerful sensation of watching broken things begin to heal. Jonathan, Marcus's use of the first name instead of Ashford or Rebecca's father, marked a shift. You don't need to give me anything. I didn't save Rebecca for profit or ownership. I did it because she's my daughter. I know. That's exactly why you should have these shares. Jonathan stood, extending his hand. I can't undo 18 years of being a mediocre father, but I can acknowledge 18 years of you being an extraordinary one. Rebecca deserves to have both her fathers invested in her success. Marcus stood, taking Jonathan's hand in a firm shake that lasted several seconds, long enough to communicate respect, forgiveness, the tentative beginning of something that might eventually become friendship. Rebecca wiped her eyes, not bothering to hide the tears. You two are going to ruin my makeup before the board meeting. Good. Eleanor's voice came from the doorway, her wheelchair rolling in with Linda's assistance. Let them see you've been crying. Let them see you're human. You came back from the dead, darling. A few tears won't diminish that. The family gathered, Marcus and Eleanor, Jonathan, Rebecca, in the conference room where 6 months ago, Marcus had taken emergency control of a company in crisis. Now they stood together, fractured pieces slowly becoming whole. The board is assembling. David Park's voice came through the intercom. They're ready when you are. One more thing before we go. Rebecca pulled a small box from her desk drawer, handing it to Marcus. Open it. Inside lay a platinum Patek Philippe watch, engraved on the back. To my father, who saw life when others saw death, who built dreams when others chose nightmares. Thank you for never giving up. Rebecca. Marcus's composure, ironclad through months of corporate warfare and criminal trials, finally cracked. Tears slipped down his face as he fastened the watch onto his wrist, the metal warm against his skin. I don't deserve this, he managed. You deserve everything. Rebecca hugged him fiercely, this man who'd fought heaven and earth to keep her alive. And you're about to get a board position, 5% equity, and a permanent seat at Ashford Digital as Chief Ethics Officer, because this company needs you. I need you. Chief Ethics Officer? Marcus pulled back, surprised. Someone has to make sure we practice what we preach. Rebecca smiled through her tears. And who better than the man who taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the profitable thing? The board meeting was a formality. Victoria Hastings's shares had been seized as proceeds of crime, then auctioned to an employee trust fund that gave every Ashford Digital worker ownership stake. The remaining board members, cleaned of anyone with connections to Rachel or Victoria, voted unanimously to restore Rebecca as permanent CEO and appoint Marcus as Chief Ethics Officer with full board voting rights. By 5 o'clock, it was official. By 6 o'clock, the press release hit every major news outlet. By 7 o'clock, Rebecca Ashford was trending worldwide. Dark, the woman who came back, on CEO Resurrection, or Justice for Rebecca. That evening, the family gathered at Marcus and Eleanor's brownstone in Brooklyn, the same house where 16-year-old Rebecca had first moved in 18 years ago, angry and broken from her parents' divorce. The same kitchen where Marcus had taught her to make his mother's jambalaya. The same living room where they'd argued about college choices and career paths and whether she should take the risk of starting her own company. Eleanor had insisted on cooking despite her MS making it difficult. Marcus helped, chopping vegetables while Eleanor directed from her wheelchair. Jonathan arrived with flowers and a nervous energy, still learning how to be part of this family he'd rejected for so long. Rebecca set the table, each small domestic action grounding her in the reality that she was alive, healthy, home. I have news. Eleanor waited until everyone was seated, jambalaya steaming on their plates. Dr. Morrison, the detective, not the criminal, called me this afternoon. Victoria Hastings's plea deal was finalized. And Rebecca's fork paused halfway to her mouth. 20 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole before 15. Eleanor's satisfaction was evident. She tried to negotiate down, but the prosecution had too much evidence. The recorded phone call with Rachel, the financial trail, her attempted flight from JFK. The judge called her a danger to society who weaponized capitalism for murder. Good. Rebecca meant it. Victoria had manipulated Rachel's jealousy, had provided the opportunity and encouragement for murder, all to increase her investment returns by a percentage point. And Rachel? 25 years plus 5 for conspiracy, attempted murder, corporate fraud, and a dozen other charges. Jonathan had been following the case obsessively, his way of processing the fact that his daughter had nearly been stolen from him forever. James Morrison got 15 for actually administering the poison, even with his cooperation. The prosecutor said the sentence sends a message that corporate crimes with violent intent will be punished as severely as any other murder attempt. Marcus raised his glass of sweet tea. He didn't drink alcohol, never had, one of the many ways he'd modeled healthy choices for Rebecca growing up. To justice. Slow, methodical, and absolutely certain. They clinked glasses, sweet tea and wine mixing in a toast that felt less like celebration and more like exhaling after holding their breath for 6 months. I've been thinking about something. Rebecca set down her glass. The media keeps calling me the CEO who came back from the dead. But that's not quite right. I didn't come back from death. I came back from the silence. From being trapped in my own body, screaming and no one hearing. From being declared gone when I was still there. She looked around the table at the faces of her family, all of them blood and choice intertwined. How many people are silenced every day? How many voices are dismissed, declared dead when they're still fighting to be heard? Women in tech, minorities in boardrooms. Anyone who doesn't fit the narrow definition of who gets to speak, who gets to matter. Rebecca's passion built with each word. I want to use what happened to me to amplify those voices. Not just through ethical AI, but through active advocacy. The Rebecca Ashford Foundation for Amplified Voices. Eleanor had clearly been thinking along similar lines. We could fund programs for underrepresented entrepreneurs, create mentorship networks, provide resources for people whose ideas are dismissed because of who they are, rather than what they're proposing. I love it. Marcus was already mentally calculating logistics. Wellington Tech could handle the technical infrastructure. Ashford Digital could provide the platform. We'd need board members with diverse expertise. And we'd need someone with experience overcoming systematic dismissal to chair it. Rebecca looked at Jonathan. Dad, you spent 20 years running a small accounting firm that bigger companies tried to bury. You know what it's like to be told you're not enough. I want you to chair the foundation, help others avoid the mistakes you made, share the lessons you learned. Jonathan stared at his daughter, this brilliant, generous woman he'd nearly lost, and broke down completely. Not the quiet tears from earlier, but deep, racking sobs of a man finally releasing 18 years of resentment and discovering what forgiveness actually felt like. "I don't deserve this," he choked out. "After how I treated you, how I resented Marcus. Deserve has nothing to do with it." Rebecca moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "This is about choosing to build instead of destroy, to amplify instead of silence, to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. Can you do that, Dad? Can you help me turn poison into purpose?" "Yes." Jonathan pulled his daughter into a hug that bridged 18 years of distance. "Yes. God. Yes. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can do better." Across the table, Marcus met Eleanor's eyes. She smiled at her husband, this remarkable man who'd taken in a broken teenage girl and her bitter ex-husband's resentment and transformed both into something beautiful through sheer persistent love. Later that night, after Jonathan left and Eleanor had gone to bed, Rebecca and Marcus sat on the brownstone's back porch, watching November stars emerge above Brooklyn's light pollution. "Do you ever think about that moment?" Rebecca asked quietly. "At the cemetery, when you stopped the funeral?" "Every day," Marcus admitted. "I think about what would have happened if Dr. Chen hadn't called, if I'd been in a meeting and missed it, if I'd doubted her findings or hesitated even 5 minutes longer. I would have been buried alive, conscious, aware, until the lack of oxygen finally killed me for real." Rebecca stated it factually, having processed this particular nightmare with her therapist for months. "I think about it too, about how many ways I could have died, should have died. About the razor-thin margin between the timeline we're in and the one where I suffocated 6 feet underground. But we're not in that timeline." Marcus's voice was firm. "We're in this one, where you survived, where justice prevailed, where you're building something that will help thousands of people who might otherwise be silenced. Because you heard me when no one else could." Rebecca leaned against her father's shoulder the way she had as a teenager. "You saw life when trained medical professionals saw death. How did you know, Marcus? What made you check?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Dr. Chen's call gave me the science. But honestly, I knew before that. I knew at the funeral, looking at you in that casket, that something was wrong. You looked too alive. Your skin tone was off, not quite the gray of death. And your expression, people who die of aneurysms don't look peaceful. They look surprised, frozen in the moment of rupture. You looked like you were sleeping. So you trusted your instincts over expert opinion. I trusted my knowledge of you." Marcus corrected gently. "I've watched you sleep for 18 years, kiddo. Christmas mornings when you were too excited to stay in bed past 5 a.m. College breaks when you'd crash on the couch mid-Netflix binge. The night your husband died, and you finally exhausted yourself crying. I know what you look like when you're actually at peace versus when you're pretending. And in that casket, you looked like you were pretending." Rebecca absorbed this, understanding finally why Marcus had been so absolutely certain. "You saved my life by knowing me. Really knowing me. That's what parents do. We see our children in ways the world never will." Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. "And you're going to take that gift and multiply it through your foundation. You're going to help people see each other more clearly, hear each other more honestly. You're going to turn the worst experience of your life into fuel for changing thousands of lives. We're going to do it together." Rebecca stood, pulling Marcus to his feet. "Because I learned from the best that success isn't about individual achievement. It's about lifting each other up, about refusing to let people stay buried, literally or metaphorically." They stood together on the porch, father and daughter by choice, CEO and chief ethics officer by profession, survivors and fighters by experience. Behind them, the brownstone glowed with warm light. Inside, Eleanor slept peacefully, her MS-ravaged body at rest but her sharp mind already planning foundation logistics. Across the city, Jonathan sat in his small apartment, 6 months sober, finally understanding that redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. but about making different choices going forward. And somewhere in Rikers Island, Rachel Morrison lay awake in her cell, 25 years of consequences stretching before her like a sentence with no parole. But here, now, on this November night with stars fighting through city light, Rebecca Ashford breathed deeply, lungs that had been poisoned now clear, heart that had nearly stopped now beating strong and steady, voice that had been silenced now ready to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She was alive, not just breathing but living with purpose, born from surviving the unsurvivable. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. The end.